The attack on Burnt Station was an exception. It was one of the most tragic scenes in the early settlement of our county. The year in which the station was taken and burnt is not ascertained. It must have been 1781-82. Isaac Davis said that he was about 6 years of age when the station was burned. He was taken prisoner. A hunter said he saw the Indians pass going towards Bullet's Lick. A man by the name of Harrison, seeing no escape for his wife and a relative visiting them, hid under the floor. Hid them under the floor. A man by the name of Osborne Bland was taken prisoner, but his wife escaped. She was found in the woods after 7 days. The husband returned after 3 years, and they raised a large family. The Indians collected their captives, and they set fire to the fort. The two women, according to James Cox, then a youth of 13, took the trace to Bardstown, but according to recollection of Elias Kinchilo, son of William Kinchilo, a settler of the station who had removed and settled some 8 or 9 miles distant. So William Kinchilo isn't even at the station. It was Mrs. Harrison and a relative who went to Cox's station. It was agreed that the two women escaped. I don't know. This is on Roots Web. Colonel Patton, who was in command of the Virginia militia serving the region, had just brought a supply of powder and lead to be used by the settlers. So in the house at the time was Colonel James Patton, who had large land interests in the area. His nephew, William Preston, had also been in the house, but had gone to Sinking Creek to ask Philip Laybrook to come over to the Draper's Meadows and help harvest grain the next day. So if you know anything about Draper's Meadows, you know what's up. So, Mary Draper Ingles, right? English? Mary English or Ingles? Wikipedia just tries to confuse things. Colonel Patton, who was in command of the Virginia militia serving the region, had just brought a supply of powder and lead to be used. lead to be used by the settlers. When the Indians attacked the house, Colonel Patton was sitting at the table right, and beside him was his long, broad sword which he seized upon the entrance of the Indians, and with it he began to fight. He cut down 2 of them, but in the meantime he was shot by one of the attackers out of his range, and immediately he died. So Colonel Patton's dead. Right. Beside him was his long, broad sword which he seized upon the entrance. Taking his sword, cut down 2, but was shot. They tricked him. They used bullets instead of a sword. Quickly the attackers gathered up all the guns and ammunition and all the household goods they could get. Then they set fires to the houses in the community. At the time of the attack, William Ingles, Mary's husband, was in the field some distance from the house, looking over his grain field, which was to be harvested on the morrow. Seeing the flames and smoke, he started running towards home, hoping it could be of assistance in protecting his family. But when he drew near the flaming houses, he saw that the Indians, who were loading plunder on the horses, were well armed, and he stopped. He could see that the Indians had not only captured his wife and the others of the meadows, but they had the horses in their possession, and that pursuit would be impossible. When 2 Indians with tomahawks in their hands dashed after William, he ran into the woods, and jumping over a log, he fell, and there he lay, while the pursuers ran around the roots of the upturned tree instead of jumping over it as he had. When the Indians passed on, still looking for him, he eluded them by running in the opposite direction. After the Indians, their captives, had gone, a company of settlers gathered and started in pursuit, but by that time the raiding party had got so far ahead that nothing could be seen of them. Some distance out on the trail, the Indians stopped at the home of Philip Barger, an old white-haired man, attacked him and cut off his head. They put the head into a bag and they carried it to the... Yeah, okay, so the same Indians who took Mary Draper Ingles is killing other people, right? They went to Philip Barger, an old white-haired man, attacked him, cut off his head. They put the head into a bag, carried it to the house of Philip Laybrook on Sinking Creek, where they gave it to Mrs. Laybrook, telling her to look into the bag, and she'd see one of her acquaintances, Philip Laybrook, as well as young Preston, whom Colonel Patton had sent on an errand, had left the house and gone by a near trail back to the meadows, else they might have met the same fate as Philip Barger. It is most likely that Colonel Patton, who had brought powder and lead to the settlement, had warned the people of possible Indian attacks. Already the French, moving down into the upper Ohio Valley from Canada, had incited Indian tribes living in the valley to rise against the English, who were slowly pushing over the Alleghenies, or Guineas. Very little had been done in the new settlement at the meadows to meet a possible attack. A few miles distant at the head of the Roanoke River was Fort Valls, but it was poorly fortified. On the 3rd day out, the course of nature. which waits not upon the conveniences nor surroundings, was fulfilled. Mary Ingles, far from habitation in the wild forest, unbounded by walls, with only the bosom of Mother Earth for a couch, covered by the green trees and the blue canopy of heaven, with a curtain of darkness around her, gave birth to a daughter. Owing to her strong physical condition, Mary Ingles was able next day to resume the journey. After mounting a horse, she was allowed to take the newborn baby into her arms, although Indians ordinarily would have killed it to get it out of the way. Dr. Hale said the most likely reason it wasn't killed because the Indians wanted to keep Mary Ingles alive and contented as possible so she might live until they could demand a big ransom for her. About 40 miles down New River, the party crossed to the west side, coming out near the mouth of the Indian Creek. From the mouth of Indian Creek, they continued to follow New River to the mouth of Bluestone River, up which they had to travel until they could find a suitable ford. Upon crossing the stream, they went over the headwaters of Paint Creek and came to Kanawha River. Okay. So that's Mary Draper Ingles. There's some, let's see, let's get rid of this page. Burnt Station, 1780, 7 miles northeast of Bardstown on West Fork, Simpsons Creek, about 2.5 miles southwest of Bloomfield, about 4.5 miles east of Cox Station. Originally known as Captain William Kinchilo Station, was attacked and burned by Indians in 1782. Later known as Charles Polk Station, possibly known as John Craig Station. One contemporary source erroneously called it Winslow Station. So John Craig was there, possibly, right? John Craig. And so William Kinchilo wasn't even there. So we're calling it, we're giving it the name of a guy who wasn't even there. John Craig Station, Charles Polk Station. And then William Kinchilo. William Kinchilo. I am the William Kinchilo. I have established a station in Louisville, close to Louisville, but I'm not going to protect it. I will leave my wife and children be, because I am William Kinchilo. So John Craig, Charles Polk, and Cox. What's Cox's station? What is this Cox's station about? So that's interesting. All right. It was called all those different names. I heard that Polk Station and Kinchilo were both burnt down, and that's what the Burnt Stations Massacre, that's why they called it, just by the, not the name of the person, but by the name of the thing. William Draper Ingles, referred to in some documents as Mary Ingles or Mary Inglis, was an American pioneer and early settler of Western Virginia. She was abducted by Indians and escaped after 2.5 months, making a harrowing trek hundreds of miles through the wilderness and over the Appalachian Mountains to return home. Early life, Mary Draper Ingles was born in 1732 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to George and Eleanor Hardin Draper, who immigrated to America from Donegal, Ireland in 1729. In 1748, the Draper family and others moved to the western frontier, establishing Draper's Meadow, a pioneer settlement on the banks of Sinking Creek near modern-day Blacksburg, Virginia. In 1750, Mary married fellow settler William Ingles and gave birth to 2 sons, Thomas in 1751 and George in 1753. On July 30th, 1755, during the French and Indian War. So there it is. That's why this thing happened, okay? And I think it's interesting we should learn not just why Mary Ingles massacre happened, but why did that other lady, why was she kidnapped? Jenny Wiley. What's her story? That's weird, isn't it? Cherokee and the Shawnee kidnapped Jenny Wiley, now they're kidnapping. Well, okay, so the French and Indian War, this is when we don't see Skippakittiki or any Shawnee villages anymore. They're all gone. Because the British burnt them all down. Thomas just marked out where Kentucky was, and then the British probably just started raising hell. The French and Indian War began with George Washington just ambushing a French surveying troop. So basically he saw another, group of men in the forest with guns, and he just jumped them, killed them. And there's a Native American that he was with that he killed him, right? So he could have just did the whole thing, but Washington was in the middle, and basically this one tiny incident could start a world war. And it did start a world war. The French and Indian Wars, the French and the British. And then the Indians all died, right? So at least they got it in their name. It's not like the Spanish-American War where the Cuba doesn't even, it's not even mentioned. But the French and Indian War is 1754 to 1763. Those are good dates to memorize. So let's mark that down as a question. All right. 1754 to 1763, the French and Indian War. 17, right? So this is 1 year into it. 1754 is the last time we saw Skippakitaki, which is the last Shawnee village of Kentucky. John Finley was there, and then all of a sudden it just disappears, right? Could have been Daniel Boone, it could have been the English, it could have been anybody, it could have been Washington. Or Christopher Gist, he could have done it himself in 51. On July 30th, 1755, during the French and Indian War, a band of Shawnee warriors and allies of the French raided Draper's Meadow, killing 4 settlers, including Mary's mother and her niece, taking 5 hostages, including Mary and her 2 sons, her sister-in-law Betty Robertson, Draper, James Cole, Henry Leonard, Mary's neighbors. Mary's husband was nearly killed but managed to flee into the forest. The Indians and their captives traveled for a month to Lower Shawnee Town on the banks of the Scioto and Ohio rivers, where James Cole and Henry Leonard were killed while running the gauntlet. So, Lower Shawnee Town. Lower Shawnee Town is in Kentucky. So that's another, I think that's Akahi or Akihi or something. But Lower Shawnee Town. Okay, so the Lower Shawnee Town is in Kentucky, and they're here. James Cole and Henry Leonard were killed while running the gauntlet. So you have Mary Draper Ingles, who was there when this happens, right? So even if, I don't know, Jenny Wiley, I don't know if these are heroic women, they survive a lot, and they have an incredible story. Incredible story. Okay, so some sources suggest that Mary gave birth to a daughter while in captivity. There's evidence to the contrary. As a prisoner, Mary sewed shirts using cloth traded to the Indians by French traders and was paid in goods for her services. In October 1755, she was taken to the Big Bone Salt Lick to make salt for the Indians by boiling brine. While working at Big Bone Lick in late October 1755, Mary persuaded another captive woman, referred to as the Old Dutch Woman, but who may have actually been German, to escape with her. And the next day, probably October 19th, they set off retracing the same route that the Indians had taken when they were abducted. They wore moccasins and carried with them only a tomahawk and a knife, both of which were eventually lost, in 2 blankets. As they were leaving the camp, they met 3 French traders from Detroit who were harvesting walnuts, and Mary traded her old dull tomahawk for a new one. They went north following the Ohio River as it curves to the east, hurrying at first because they expected the Indians to pursue them. As it turned out, the Indians made only a brief search before assuming that the 2 women had been carried off by wild animals, as they told Mary's son Thomas when he met some of them many years later after the Battle of Point Pleasant, 1774. So 19 years later. So as they're, she's with this old German woman, and they run away, basically running the same route that they had taken when they were abducted. So just going back the same route. They wore moccasins, and they carried with them only a tomahawk and a knife, which were eventually lost in 2 blankets. So for some reason they lost their tomahawk and their knife, and they had 2 blankets. So they had shoes and they had blankets. As they were leaving the camp, they met with 3 French traders from Detroit who were harvesting walnuts, and Mary traded her old doll tomahawk for a new one. I would think things should be okay once they met these traders, but maybe they didn't want to protect these women out in the middle of nowhere. After 4 or 5 days, they reached the junction of the Ohio with the Licking River near the present-day location of Cincinnati. And there they found an abandoned cabin that contained a supply of corn and an old horse in the backyard. They took the horse to carry the corn, but he was lost when they tried to take him across was probably Dutchman's Ripple. Their route followed the Ohio River, the Kanawha River, the New River, crossing over the Licking River, Big Sandy River, Little Sandy River, 12 of Pole Creek, the Guyandotte River, the Coal River, Paint Creek, Bluestone River, right? You know what I'm talking. Okay. So, I'm not sure, let's see, who or what. The aftermath. After recovering from her journey, reunite with her husband. They both reunite with her husband. Jenny Wiley has 5 more kids afterwards. Mary went on to have 4 more kids. So after these white pioneer women were abducted, kidnapped, made to go through this entire, their kids killed in front of them. And then they eventually meet up with their husbands again. They reconvene and have more kids. 4 more kids: Mary, Susan, Rhoda, and John. In 1762, William and Mary established the Ingles Ferry across the New River, the Ingles Ferry Hill Tavern and Blacksmith Shop. She died there in 1815 at the age of 83 years old. The site of her log cabin with the stable and family cemetery constitute part of the Ingles Bottom archaeological sites. Mary's son George died in Indian captivity, but Thomas was ransomed and returned to Virginia in 1768 at the age of 17. By then he had become fully acculturated and spoke only Shawnee. So George Draper Ingles, he only spoke Shawnee. So they took his kid, and they kidnapped her, they kidnapped the kids, and he knew Shawnee. He knew how to speak fluent Shawnee, right? Which is what, Algonquin? What's Shawnee? Or is that the language? Shawnee is called the Shawnee River. There's a Cumberland River. Kentucky is basically Shawnee. The Central Algonquin language, spoken in parts of central and northeastern Oklahoma by the Shawnee people. It is originally spoken in Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania. It is closely related to other Algonquin language, such as the Meskwaki Sauk, Sac and Fox, and the Kickapoo, which is fascinating to me. So the Shawnee language it was part of Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania. It's closely related to other Algonquin languages, the Sac and the Fox. So no such thing as a fox, right? Only Sac. And Meskwaki. The Meskwaki is the fox. And the Kickapoo. The Kickapoo are also badasses. So they had badass language. The Shawnee language had to be a badass language, right? It had to be like Haitian Creole. Kickapoo, Shawnee, and then the Meskwaki Sac or Sauk. And they still speak it in parts of central and northeastern Oklahoma. So the Shawnee language is the language of the Shawnee people. So Thomas underwent several years of rehabilitation and education under Dr. Thomas Walker at Castle Hill, Virginia. So they give him to Dr. Thomas Walker, who was another founder, right? He later served as a lieutenant under Colonel William Christian in Lord Dunmar's war against the Shawnees. He married Eleanor Grills in 1775 and settled in Burke's Garden, Virginia, where in 1782 his wife and 3 children were kidnapped by Indians who killed Eleanor and the 2 older children. The oldest daughter was rescued by her father. In 1761, Mary Ingles' brother John Draper attended a gathering of Cherokee chiefs at which a treaty to end the Anglo-Cherokee War was prepared. He found a man who knew of his wife, Betty Robertson Draper, who was living with the family of a widowed Cherokee chief. She was ransomed, and John took her to New River Valley. So I didn't read any of it. I just totally skipped over all of it. A lot of books, a lot of movies, an outdoor historical drama, just like the Jenny Wiley. So Jenny Wiley, Mary Ingles, it's almost identical. The Captives. There's an ABC made-for-TV movie, 1995, starring Cheryl Lee. Or wait, that's the 2004, The Captives. Follow the River is the novel. So Follow the River was the TV show. In Boone County, Mary Draper Ingles. There's an 8-foot-tall statue depicting Mary Draper Ingles outside Boone County Public Library in Burlington, Kentucky, commemorating her escape from captivity at Big Bone Lick. The statue stands upon a granite-based mounted with a bronze plaque outlining her story. Kentucky Route 8 in Campbell, Bracken, and Mason counties is officially named the Mary Ingles Highway. So Mary Ingles has got a highway. She's got an 8-foot statue, bronze statue, right? Mary Ingles Elementary School in Tad, West Virginia. So she's got her own elementary school. The West End Cemetery, she's got a huge monument dedicated to her. Radford University, the residence halls are named Draper Hall and Ingles Hall in honor of Mary Draper Ingles. Virginia Tech Library holds documents once owned. Well, that's pretty cool. The Virginia Tech Library holds documents once owned by Mary Draper Ingles. The Ingles Ferry is listed in the National Register of Historical Places. I knew that wasn't significant. Ingles Bottom Archaeological Site, 17. It's on Wikipedia. Check that out if you want to. So, I still need to get into the Kinchilo massacres. So, if you want to hear more about the Kinchilo Station massacres, just watch Reading Rainbow.